What's up, YouTube? We're going to have a little discussion today. Today I wanted to talk about what cities should we have national/world yo-yo contests in here in America coming up next. So, cities in America. First and foremost, I have to talk about Cleveland, Ohio, because we've had the last two U.S. hosted World Yo-Yo Contests in Cleveland, put together and hosted by Mr. Steve Brown, who did an amazing job. I got to put Steve over. This year's Worlds was just phenomenal. The venue was phenomenal. I really like Cleveland. I end up in Cleveland a lot. There's a lot of good eating in Cleveland. For sure, and I always end up eating good in Cleveland, and I did. This was no exception this year. Easy to get to Cleveland, easy to get out of Cleveland. Lots of major highways and interstates and things driving into Cleveland. Very accessible, super accessible city. Not overly expensive, although the hotels were a little pricey. At least I thought, but you know, I guess it's over by like Lake Erie, so you know. Anyway, a little pricey on the hotels, but otherwise, the city itself of Cleveland, not that pricey. And really just nice. Everything in Cleveland is very clean, and it's pretty easy to park in Cleveland, which is a big thing when you're trying to get a lot of people in one spot. It's got to be easy to park. They've got a major airport that's pretty nice, and there's lots of places to stay, and it's, you know, even if you only want to stay 20 or 30 minutes out and you kind of commute in or whatever, very easy. Plus, there's a lot of yo-yoers in Cleveland, particularly around Cleveland, probably because Steve lives there, so he has major influence. And it works out. I'm not saying that it doesn't work out. I have no complaints with how Cleveland went this year. I thought it went great. Cleveland as a city, though, and the people of Cleveland, I'm not trying to hate on the people of Cleveland, but somebody had said it best to me, and I can't remember who it was, and I apologize. But you can't bring your kids there, at least not to downtown Cleveland, and not keep a really close eye on them. And I know most 20-something yo-yo players probably this doesn't register with them. But when I was downtown, particularly wandering around, and Nate and Brett can vouch for me here, there were a lot of people talking to themselves loudly who were cursing and swearing and speaking in rather filthy tongues. Not something that affects me. I don't care. Speak however you want to speak. But if I was bringing I don't bring my kids. They don't want to go to yo-yo contests. But I wouldn't wander around the streets of downtown Cleveland, as nice as they are and as nice of restaurants and stuff as there are. I wouldn't wander around down there with my kids because of what they'd see and hear. And with police around, I'm not saying it's not safe. It was probably fine. I didn't hear of any incidents. Wouldn't have expected any. But downtown Cleveland, not necessarily as kid-friendly of a city as you would expect it to be. And somebody had said that, you wouldn't want to bring your kids. And I was like, that's a good point. I mean, if I did, we just stayed at the hotel. We wouldn't have really gone very far. We probably would have just ate in the hotel mostly, or we'd have drove to places. And that's more or less the way we would have done it. It wouldn't have been a, city excursion, wander around downtown type of thing. For me, though, I feel like that's part of it. And while Cleveland works out in most aspects, with it being affordable, easy access, it's downtown being not as friendly, in the same way that like downtown Detroit wouldn't necessarily be as friendly, or like downtown, downtown Chicago is pretty swanky, but like parts of like downtown Chicago, or parts of like, you would maybe, certain parts of like downtown New York, wouldn't necessarily work out, major downtown Philly, major cities like that, like Cleveland and stuff. Cleveland's a big city. Usually have their issues downtown just because of how many people there are. And downtown generally being the hub of the public transportation, you tend to get, particularly in the evenings, some shadier characters, and not necessarily people you want to have your kids around. So I wanted to talk about, and I know this has already been like a 4-minute intro, what other cities would work really well to host major yo-yo contests but also sort of in the future, and also sort of be very kid friendly, but very accessible, etc. First one I'm going to bring up is Columbus, Ohio. I think Columbus is, in my estimation, a slightly smaller city. Every time I've ever been to Columbus, it always feels a little less big and scary. Like Cleveland can feel big and scary. Not that I'm afraid of, but I'm thinking here as a father and as bringing kids. I feel like Columbus is, and parts of Columbus, and maybe this is just the parts I've been to, are a bit more the way I would feel about Pittsburgh. Whereas, it's all very fine, it's all very friendly, and it's all very sort of corporate mall, parking lot area space. Whereas Cleveland is a big, it's an old city with downtown and stuff like that. Sort of more of like an old big city type of deal, like, Philly or New York or whatever else. Columbus, that doesn't feel that way to me. I feel like Columbus would be nice. It's also got a major airport. It's got it's pretty easy to get into Columbus. It's hard to get out with that loop, though. I don't know. Maybe I just don't understand how the loops work, but I always get stuck in Columbus. I get into Columbus fine. I never leave Columbus very well. Columbus has great food. It's cheap to be there, and I like Columbus, too. So, if we're thinking Ohio, Cleveland, Columbus, both are about 2 hours from me. I think Columbus is actually about 3 hours from me. But still, both are very, very nice cities, and it's, Columbus is maybe a little safer, a little more child-friendly, and that was sort of my other thought, because, now we've been to Cleveland twice, what else we got for the World Yoyo Contest? Columbus is right there, too, plus if Steve's still in Ohio as well, so, he can maybe coordinate that a little bit. I don't know how many yo-yo players are in Columbus or around Columbus to sort of help facilitate that, but who knows? Who knows? Columbus could be on the list as a cool one. I was going to mention this one first, but I figured that you guys would call me like a shill or something. Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh would be a great place to host the World Yo-Yo Contest. Why? I live here, so I wouldn't have to do anything. I just live in my house and drive to the contest. But we have downtown a beautiful, pretty new actually still. It's 10, 15 years old maybe. Convention center. Downtown. It's huge. It's wonderful. I've been to a dozen events. I go to probably a dozen events there a year. So it's a great venue for everything from car shows to Comic-Cons to I took the bar exam there. Literally the coolest venue. And it's huge. They would have multiple ballrooms that would be wonderful and very capable to hold a World Yo-Yo Contest in. And it's right in the heart of what is sort of the upscale preppy district, the theater district of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So it's right across the street, or right across the river from the North Shore Stadiums, which is beautifully developed and all newly developed since we built the new stadiums 20 years ago. Lots of stuff to do just over the bridge. Very safe to walk over the bridge. People do it all day, all night. Very well lit over there. Lots of theaters over there. Lots of restaurants and everything. It's actually really safe because downtown Pittsburgh is not so much a place where people live, at least not that part of where downtown Pittsburgh is. Not so much a place where people live, it's mostly a place where people work. You're more likely to see people in business suits, maybe not on Saturdays, but you're more likely to see people in business suits going to work than you are to see anybody else. And generally the tone of that area is not necessarily upscale per se, because it's not like, it's, more or less just like desk office job IT type stuff. There's a big PNC. There's 3 big PNC buildings down there that are mostly just filled with, people doing bank stuff and IT work and what have you. So, not crazy high salary type stuff, although there's some of that down there. But so, you get your sort of like lunch spots and your nice dinner spots, and there's also some swankier upscale stuff. Plus, like I said, SW Randall is down there too, probably 3-4 blocks from that convention center, and that's a big toy store with all kind of yo-yos in it, and it's really actually very cool as well. So there's lots of cool things down there, and it's very safe. And I take my children down there all the time. We never have an issue. Love going downtown Pittsburgh with the kids, especially around the theater district and stuff. We never have an issue. I feel like it's very safe and It's always very good. The other thing I want to put over for Pittsburgh is we have a major airport, and it's sort of, because Pittsburgh's such a small city, I live about 3 miles out of downtown. And there are 7-ish hotels in the vicinity of my neighborhood. All of them can be had for pretty cheap. And then you can ride the bus downtown to the, like, you don't even have to drive. Like, if you can get to the hotel, you can ride the bus, and you can ride the bus back. And it's like $2.50. Our public transportation's pretty good. We've also got a T that'll run from downtown to the North Shore, where there's tons of other stuff, including, baseball stadiums and everything. So our public transportation is really up to snuff if you're going to stay within the area. Plus, it's cheap to stay here. It's generally cheap to fly to Pittsburgh, depending on where you're coming. It's not cheap to fly to Pittsburgh from, like, Cleveland or Columbus or anywhere close, because they're going to send you to Chicago and then they're going to bring you back to Pittsburgh. But if you're flying from, like, Florida or from California or whatever, it's usually, if you book it ahead of time, pretty cheap to fly into Pittsburgh. We've got a lot of major airlines. Southwest is usually really cheap in and out of Pittsburgh. So that's usually how I fly. Just an FYI. Other cities that I think would be cool. I had a really good time in Chicago. I feel like Chicago is a really weirdly segmented city where, while Chicago is probably the most expensive option, because their downtown is so, like, their theater district where we had nationals 2 years ago is so, like, kind of swanky. It's really, like, a safe area to walk around in because it's really expensive to be there. Everything in Chicago was $5 more than I expected it to be. Just to put in that sense. So, very safe. I didn't feel like I would have had trouble walking the kids around, although that was, like, the hottest weekend I've ever been anywhere. It melted me. Although Chicago, like I said, is a little expensive. So, but I think Pittsburgh's cheap. Could have it here in Pittsburgh. It'd be very cheap. Other cities where it would be cool, like I said, Cleveland would be great. Also, there's places sort of, maybe not Atlanta. I feel like Atlanta's a huge city too. That maybe wouldn't be great. But there's tons of places in the Carolinas that are relatively cheap to stay, like Asheville. I don't know if there's any venues there that could host it, but tons of places down in the Carolinas as well where it'd be very nice. And, that's just my thought. Lots of cool little cities all along over here on this side. Once you get down into Virginia and around the D.C. area as well, you'd have to stay out of D.C. per se, because I think that just would be crazy expensive. But plenty of cities around that area that could also host a major contest if the correct venues are in existence, and that it would be very easy to get to, because people who are commuting to DC and to the DC area, there's a lot of major airports and just things around there. So that was my thoughts on the couple of other places on sort of this side of America where we could have this stuff. In lieu of random Tuesday thoughts, this was my random thought today. It was in my head the whole way home. So wanted to put that over. Leave it out to you guys and say, what do you think? What cities do you guys think would be a great place to have the World Yoyo Contest? I want to know. I want to learn. I haven't been everywhere in the world. But think of, like, if you have a great convention center, or if your downtown is really nice and, like, you could take your kids there, and, like, think of, like, kid-friendly places that would also have a venue that wouldn't be terribly expensive. I feel like those are sort of the three things. Kid-friendly, have the correct venue type, and not overly expensive. Oh, and 4, be very accessible. Those, I feel like, are the 4 criteria. What do you guys think? What cities in America would be great for that? I told you my reasoning for Pittsburgh. You tell me your reasoning for other cities. But thanks for watching, guys. Please make sure you like and subscribe. Cheers to you. I'll see you next time.